Hey, welcome, and we are so glad that you're here with us today. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the pastors at River Lake, and we believe church should be relevant, simple, and real. We hope to see you this weekend.
Amen, amen. How's everybody doing today? Good. Hey, welcome. My name is Nick, one of the pastors. I want to welcome those watching online with us. Before we jump into the message, we got a quick announcement. We are starting a series next week entitled Winners and Losers. It's on the election, and to be honest, we may not need 4 services after this next series, so we'll see. We've been working really hard for that, and I may effectively kill it. But with that said, all joking aside, because of the sensitivity of the content, and the fact that my staff is very concerned about the things that come out of my mouth randomly, we will not be broadcasting it online. And so, no, it's serious, okay? So yeah, we if one of them makes it through, we may post it. But I say that to say I don't want to surprise anybody. If you want to hear what we're talking about for the next 3 weeks, you got to be here. We may put a very polished version, but if you like the raw version, you're going to have to show up here. So anyway, I'm excited about that. We're going to hit a very, what I think, relevant, real topic and present it in the most simple way possible. So that's what we got coming up next week. Don't miss that. Okay, with that said, we are wrapping up our series today, Terms and Conditions. And if you missed it last week because we didn't have services here, we had our parking lot done, had some nice stripes put in there, yeah? Some of you need to learn what stripes are, though. Okay, so I was watching, I'm like, oh, you've gotten way too used to not using stripes. So anyway, we had it online, and what we talked about last week was we talked about this tension between covenants and contracts. And we said there's a big difference that the American economy and American culture is built on contracts, but God's economy and God's world is built on covenants. And if you missed it, you can go online and check it out. We talked about what it looks like for God to have a covenant with us. And the power that comes from that what we said was God's covenant with us, and if you don't have a relationship with God, I want you to know it is an incredible relationship to know and be known by God, that it is relational, it is unconditional, it is eternal, and it is sacramental. And that is so foundational for what we're talking about today, because today is kind of part 2 of a conversation that we started last week. And what I want to talk about is the contracts and covenants we have with each other, because our covenant relationship with God affects our relationships with other people. As I was prepping for this, I thought about a friend of mine that I had in college. This is a college roommate I had. We were pretty close, but it was a relationship of proximity. It is what I would call a contract relationship. And I remember we had graduated college, and when I say graduate, I meant he graduated, I got kicked out, but that's a different sermon. But we were both out of college for a while, and I got the phone call from him, and I remember thinking, if you've ever had a friend like this, I remember thinking, what do they want? Anybody ever have a friend like that? You know, it's like every time they call, it's never, I love you. It's like, And so he called, and we're talking back and forth, and we're having the conversation. It's like, hey, man, how you doing? And the whole time I'm thinking, where's the angle? And we get about 5 minutes into the conversation, and the angle came. He's like, hey, dude, not much going on. Just curious, like, what are you doing next Saturday? And I'm like, well, what are you doing next Saturday? And he's like, well, I'm tearing off a roof, and I didn't know if you'd want to help me. And I'm like, no. But I did, okay? I went there, and I tore off the roof, and the whole time he's talking about, like, man, I miss this. We need to hang out more. This is really cool. Like, I'll text you later. And the bottom line is, this is the last time I saw him. And honestly, I'm really okay with that. That relationship, it wasn't a bad parting. I wasn't upset. It was actually an agreement between us that we kind of have a relationship that was what I would call today contractual. It was just kind of an agreement like, hey, here's the expectation. It was not super deep. We knew each other. We were friends. It was just a relationship of proximity. And the moment that we were no longer in proximity, we were no longer, quote unquote, friends, and that's okay. And what I want to talk about today is the difference between contract relationships and covenant relationships. But to kind of help you understand maybe the difference between the two of them, I want to give you a few contract relationships. And number one is this: it's the checkup friend. Okay? Anybody have a friend like this and maybe you're this friend that when they're bored or whatever, they just text message you, and all they'll say is like, hey man, just checking in. How you doing? Hey girl, what's going on? And then you'll never hear from them for like a year. Or it's Facebook. Hey, just thinking of you. Why? Like you're just like, That's weird. Stop it. Please don't. But again, that's okay. We all have friends that are like checkup friends. It's just, that's the level that you're at, and that's okay. We have you have a truck friend. I'm going to hurt some people's feelings here real quickly, but, okay? If you have a truck, you need to know people are your friend because you have a truck. It is not your sparkling personality, okay? You'd be like, I got all these friends. It's the truck, not you, just so we're clear. You could also replace the word truck with you have a boat, okay? If you have a boat or a trailer or whatever, it doesn't really matter what it is, but we all have those friends, or maybe you're that friends with somebody, and you're like, I don't really like them, but man, I love that. It's a contract, and you put up with stuff, and it's an agreement. We have the Mr. or Miss right now, which, again, we've talked about that. But a little bit more serious is maybe some of you, and maybe you're watching online, and you just have a relationship with somebody, and you know they're not Mr. and Mrs. Right, but they're there, and they're okay, and you're not alone. And the bottom line is, if you're being honest, or they're being honest, if you left or they left, they'd replace you in 2 weeks. In fact, if you would look at their history or your history, you haven't been alone for more than 2 weeks. But you just go from relationship to relationship to relationship to relationship, and you're not looking for the right one, you're just looking for the right now. And again, that's a contractor relationship. I don't even know if that's bad. You just got to know that that's kind of the world that we live in. There is the trash can. This one's serious. This is the trash can. Again, if you don't know what this means, this is the person who calls you and does what I call verbally vomits on you, okay? You know what I'm talking about? It's like they start in fifth gear, all right? You're like, hello, I'm going to tell you about it. And they just dump, all right? And they will tell you all their problems. And anytime there's chaos, they tell you all their stuff. And they feel better. You don't, but they do. They're like, I feel better. And you're like, I feel icky. This is weird. Like, I got to move on. I had a person come into my office one time when I was just starting out in ministry. And this is a sweet older lady, and she came in and did this. She came in and just vomited all this stuff. And I'm young, and I'm trying to help her. And I'm like, oh, you should do this, and don't do this. And she's like, oh, that's great news. Okay, yeah. And we get up, and I'm thinking, oh, that was really good. Okay, I was helpful. I felt like it was bad, but and she goes, I said, hey, I hope this is helpful. I'll be praying for you. Let me know if you need anything. And she goes, oh, absolutely. She's like, I just need to do this every couple months, so I'll see you in 2 months. And I'm like, no, you won't. No. We're not going to do that. I'm not a therapist, all right? You should see somebody for that, but not me. So, but again, we all have that trash can. And then the last one, and this is the one that's the most painful. This is the one that, again, I'll bet every single person in here, you've had this one, and it might explain your hurt. It might explain why you're watching online and not even in a church. And today, hopefully, I'm going to talk about a different way that might explain how to heal from this. But all of us have had a friend. Maybe we grew up with them, and we thought they were in it with us forever. And something happened, and it got complicated. It got tough. It was awkward. And they were gone. And you felt betrayed. You felt abandoned. You felt stabbed in the back. It could be in a marriage. Maybe that's what happened. That you really believed. You thought this was the person I'm going to be with for the rest of my life. I'm committed, and you were committed, and they were not. And it got hard. And there was some stuff that came out, and it got raw, and it got real, and it was really tough. And again, you wouldn't dismiss the toughness of it. It was tough, but they left. And again, maybe you have abandonment issues. Maybe it's a father figure or a mother figure that left. And again, there's relational issues with that you feel abandoned. Or maybe, and this is the one that I'm processing right now as a pastor, maybe it was the church, because the church is terrible at this. The church is terrible about standing up and going, we love you and welcome and you're awesome and be just you and come as you are until you do. And then somebody gets pregnant, or somebody goes through a divorce, or something comes out that shouldn't. And all of a sudden, you're politely asked not to come back. All of a sudden, they look at you and say, hey, that was wrong. You need to stand up in front of the church and tell everybody you're sorry and try to embarrass you. Or maybe they don't say a thing. They just kind of sit at a different place. They used to sit next to you, but now it's kind of like they're sitting over there. And again, not with their words, but with their eyes and their actions, they communicate. Whew. We had a contractual relationship. And as long as you behaved in church, as long as your kids behaved, as long as it didn't get messy or awkward or tough, you are so welcome. But the moment it does, we think it'd be best for everybody if you'd go somewhere else. Church has been terrible about that. And I want you to know, if you're here today, and again, maybe it's why you're watching online, and something happened, and you've been hurt, you've been stabbed in the back, you've been left, you've been abandoned in some way. There is hope. There's a different way to walk through life than contractual relationships. It's something deeper. See, I think for all of us, whether you're a Christian or not, our default is a relational contracts. I think that's just what we default to, and I don't think that's bad. I think you should have contractual relationships. I have a lot of them. And what I mean by that is I have boundaries, I have guardrails, listen, I think we're good, and I like you, and I think you like me, but you can cross a boundary, and I can walk away. I'm incredibly guarded with who I let in my inner circle. And I don't think that's bad, but I think that's our default. But to go deeper, to acquire healing, but to be fully known and to know, well, that requires relational covenants. And that's what our world does not understand. That's what our world does not offer. In a society that seeks happiness over wholeness, in a society that seeks right now over the right way, well, everything, including you, is contractual. And so what I want to do today is I want to spend a few moments walking through 3 distinct covenant relationships that I think you should have. There's more than 3, but I want to walk through 3 of them very quickly. This is high level. There's obviously more of the topic that we could talk about with each of these. But 3 things to consider as we talk about covenants versus contracts, because what I know is all of us have been hurt on some level. Healing will never come through a contract. It'll always come through a covenant. So number 1 is this. It's a covenant with others. What I mean by that is this. Again, I think in this room right now, there are introverts and extroverts. And if you don't know which you are, you're the introvert, okay? Just so we're clear. Like, everybody knows the extroverts. They're like, I got 5,000 friends, like, oh, yay. You're mad because Facebook limits your friends to 5,000 because you can clip 50. Like, that angers you, okay? You just see limits. You go to parties. Man, you have thousands of friends. That's awesome. Listen, here's the deal. 99.99% of them or more are contracts. That's okay. It's not bad. There's nothing wrong. You should have boundaries. You should have contractual relationships. But you should have 1 or 2. Maybe 3 or 4 at the most. And I don't know the limit. Everybody's different. You should have a few people. That's your ride or die. You should have a few people that, you know what? It's not about what they can do for you and whether they're available to you. You should have a few people that you just look at and go, no, I'm with them and they're with me and we're good. Because in a world of contracts, what you need is a covenant. Because I'm telling you right now, you're going to have a bad day. You're going to have a bad season if you're married. What's going to carry you through is not your good attitude. It's not your contractual friends. It's the people at your lowest moments who sit down next to you and go, I'm with you, no matter what. And again, that's what our world doesn't have a lot of anymore. Used to. We don't. There's a story in the Old Testament. It's one of my favorite stories. In fact, I preach through this story once every 4 years. I've already done it twice in the life of the church. It's coming up maybe next year or the year after that. It's the book of Ruth. And it's got a passage in there that is so incredibly powerful. If you've never read the book of Ruth, you should go home and read it today. It's 4 chapters. It'll take you 6 minutes, okay? But in that short story is so much about relationships and God and where he's at and where he's in the middle of your relationships and what he can and cannot do in and through them. But in chapter 1, it starts, and the context is this. Naomi, she's the mother-in-law. Her husband has died. Both of her sons have died. She has nothing. She has no food. She has no money. She has no hope. She has a God that she's really angry and bitter at, and she believes in him, but she can't stand him. And she decides that she had left Israel. She's going back home, and all she has left literally are 2 daughter-in-laws that are following her back to Israel with really very little hope of anything. That's kind of what would happen. I mean, they're the daughter-in-laws. They were married to her sons, but both sons have died, and they can do whatever they want. And I want you to see a conversation between these two, because I'm telling you, if you get this, it's powerful. It says this. At this, meaning they're traveling back and they're going back and forth, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. Said, hey, listen, you have nothing to offer me. Okay? Well, I was here when I was married to your son, and it was a contractual relationship, and we kind of walked through that, but now that you have nothing to offer me, listen, no offense, I love you, I'm out, and this is perfectly acceptable. Again, it's okay. But Ruth clung to her. There's 2 different ways to handle relationships. And again, you can't have 50 of these relationships, but you should have a couple. And the story goes on. It says, look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Side note, she is the world's worst evangelist, okay? Like literally, she's looking at me like, hey, have you tried Buddha? You should try Buddha again. Go back to the other God. Like, it's crazy, okay? But she goes on and she's like, listen, you should I have nothing to offer you. And again, in a contractual relationship, that makes perfect sense. If I cannot offer you anything, you should leave. In a covenant, it doesn't matter. Because it's not based on what you do. It's based on who you are. And so Ruth said, and this is so powerful, so beautiful. Ruth replied, do not urge me to leave or to turn back from you. And this is the part, I just love this. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. That is a covenant. That is all about what Ruth brings to the table, not what Naomi brings to the table. That is all about Ruth saying, no. Our relationship is not based on anything that you provide to me. It's based on everything that I will bring to you. And I'm with you. Essentially, here's what she says. Next slide. I'm with you because of who I'm called to be, not what you can do for me. And again, you can't have a lot of these relationships, but I'm telling you, if you don't have a few people that in your lowest moment, that if your worst, darkest secrets came out, if the things that you hide, if the things that you kind of conceal, if you don't have a few people that at your lowest moment wouldn't look at you and still go, no, I'm with you. No, that was terrible. That was dumb. That was bad. Or man, I had no clue. Why didn't you tell me? Why couldn't you trust me? Like if you don't have those people that kind of sit across from you at your lowest moments, go, man, listen, I'm with you, not because of what you do for me, but because of who I'm called to be. You are missing out. You were made, again, to know and be known by other people. And too often the church is the place that we pretend the most, that we guard the most, that we walk in every single week pretending like everything's good. Why? Because somewhere along the way, we got the false idea that, man, if we're a follower of Jesus, we have to be perfect and we can't have any issues and we can't have any addictions and we can't have any struggles and our marriage has to be perfect and there can't be any problems with our finances or whatever, and so we just pretend. The church is a hospital for the broken, not a holy place for the saints. It's totally different. It's the first one. Second one is this. It's a covenant with your spouse. Now, I'm going to speak to single people, married people, and if you're divorced, you too. So wherever you're at, I want to be very, very clear. This applies to all of them. But at the end of the day, our culture treats marriage like a contract. And again, from day one, Lisa and I, we never in the history of we don't use the word divorce. We don't joke with the word divorce. It's not funny to us. We believe words have power. Proverbs 26. It's like, no. We don't even joke about that, okay? But every now and then, like she sent me this meme because my wife's love language is memes. Anybody else's wife like that? Like I haven't talked to her all day, but I got 57 memes, Like she sent me this one day and I thought this was great. It's this right here. It says, when we get married, there is no such thing as divorce. You tired of me? Go to bed. We'll try again tomorrow. I went to bed at 3 o'clock several nights. So anyway. I said that first service, somebody said, Nick, my wife goes to bed at 7 o'clock. I wonder what that means. I'm like, well, I know. Anyway, so we will set you up for counseling next week. Let's go. So anyway, no, it's again, that's silly, but there's a level of too often we quit so early. It's like, oh man, I'm tired of you. Go to bed. Oh, I'm frustrated. This is hard. Of course it's hard. And when you treat it like a contract, what happens is you set yourself up for failure. And nothing in our culture, if you're single, man, if I could speak anything into you right now, if you're single thinking about getting married, do not get a prenup if you're a Christian. I'll tell you why. Everybody's like, oh, you got to protect yourself. No, here, Pastor Jamie said this perfectly. A prenup is preparing for your divorce. It is essentially me looking at you and saying, listen, I'm going to do everything I can to protect myself from you. A marriage covenant says, I'm going to do everything I can to open up myself to you. It's radically different. And when you start a marriage with a contract, I'm telling you, it's the wrong message. And if you've done that before, there is grace. If you're in here like, oh, Nick, listen, there's grace. I'm just saying, if you're single and you've not done, don't start that way. Because marriage is meant to be a covenant, which is like permanent. We talked covenants last week, and if you were with us, remember what we said was this covenant was this thing in the Old Testament, and we looked at the image where Abram got some animals and he cut them in half and he parted them. And what we said was this: in the old days, both people would walk through this imagery of these cut in half animals. And the decision was that if either one of us break this covenant, let it be done to us. Let our bodies be torn in half if we ever break this covenant. That was the imagery that an Old Testament covenant was. And it's still true today. That marriage is meant to be a covenant. And there are like very, 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 very few ways out. In fact, Jesus was asked this question. It's such a challenging passage. And he speaks to this, and it's probably not talked about enough. But Matthew 19, it says this. Some Pharisees came to him, as Jesus, to test him. And they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? I love how they ask that. Hey, Jesus, listen, you're a smart guy. You claim to know the word of God, and you claim to speak for God. Yes, I do. Okay, cool. Like, what's the limit? Where are we at? Like, at what point can I go, she is so nagging. She just talk. Have you heard her voice, Jesus? Yes, I have. You know, like, you chose her. Oh, they changed. You don't understand. Like, when I married him, he was this way. He's changed. Well, of course he changed. He's with you. I've spent 5 minutes with you. I feel different. Like, I've thought that. I've never said that. But anyway. We come up with all these reasons in our marriages of like, oh, you don't understand. And we want the limit. Doesn't God want you to be happy? And what about this? And what about this? And all these exceptions and all these kind of standards. And Jesus speaks to it. And I'm telling you, this is hard to hear. In a room this full, there are legitimate issues, problems, pain. What I'm about to say, I do not want to diminish anybody's pain or struggles. But our standard is what Jesus said, not what we want. And too often we confuse the two, and we go looking for churches or people that will validate our information instead of looking for, or we're looking for affirmation instead of information in what we want. So here's his response. Again, this is challenging, especially if you're in a place where you want to get out. He says, I tell you that anyone, meaning there are no exceptions. There are no other, like anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual morality, there is a standard, and marries another woman, he commits adultery. That's it. And I'm telling you, there were people listening to this conversation, and there was confusion, and there were questions. Because can we just be honest, that's a high standard. Which again, if you're single, listen, be very, very, very careful about who you marry. You get to choose them. I get it. It's hard. It's a high standard. And what happens is I say this and other people have preached this and people sit back and go, Nick, there's no way Jesus meant that. And I love that statement. I love that tension because here is the deal. I think the disciples had the same tension that you might have of going, are you kidding me? That feels ridiculously high. Which is why a few verses later, it says even in the text, it says this, the disciples said to him, this is great, if this is the situation between a husband and a wife, it's better not to marry. They look at him and go, yeah, that's it? Yes. And Jesus doesn't kind of qualify and go, oh, you misunderstood. It's not that bad. You should read it. His response is, he just looks at him and goes, after they say it's better not to marry, and he goes, yep. In fact, it literally says, Jesus' response is, yeah, some can accept this truth, some cannot. It's just like he just drops a mic and goes, yeah, moves on. Because a marriage is a covenant, not a contract. And if it's a contract, you got all these clauses, you got all these stipulations, and what about, and he quit doing, and she quit doing, and they used to, and they started to do this, and I didn't know about this, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But in a covenant, it's different. Covenant is radically different. And again, I hear all the time, and I'm going to push a little bit, and I just need you to hear my heart with this. I think I probably said it poorly first service, so I'm going to do my best here. Every now and then, a couple will tell me and justify, and they will leverage their children for their wrong decisions. And so they will say some version of this. Nick, you don't understand, we fight all the time. And it's terrible for our kids. And it's better for our kids to be in an environment where there's no fighting, and there's no yelling, and there's no arguing. And so it's better for our kids, for us to get a divorce than them to be raised in that terrible environment. Respectfully, there's a third option. You could quit leveraging your kids, start acting like an adult, and quit fighting. You've created what is called a false dichotomy, which just means you've created two options and made it only seem like there's two options when there's three or four. And an option is you could grow up. You could quit fighting. But what happens is they leverage their kids and they justify their behavior so they don't feel bad about it. This is why I love what Gary Thomas says. If you're married and you've never read this book, I want to encourage you, read this book. If you're single and you want to get married, read this book. If you're divorced and you'd like to get married again, read this book. If you're divorced and don't want to get married, you don't have to read it. But anyway, so it's the only one, all right? I love this quote. He says this, as long as a couple is married, they continue to display, however imperfectly, the ongoing commitment between Christ and his church. Thus, simply sticking it out becomes, and I love this, vitally important. Our marriages are a covenant, and they reflect the covenant that Christ has between you and him. And let's be honest, you've done some jacked up, messed up things, and it would be easy. We talked about it last week for God to look at you and go, I'm out. And he doesn't. And he says your commitment to your spouse models for your kids the gospel in a way that nothing else, no pastor, no sermon, nothing else can. Amen. It's vitally important. And so here's the deal. You can break the contract and be fine. You can go to the courthouse, spend $2,000, 15 minutes, done. But the problem is a broken covenant. Well, it'll break you. That's why I run into people all the time. They got a divorce. Took them 15 minutes for the contract. They're still dealing with it 15 years later. Because two became one. And that image of may it be done to us, that tearing apart. May it be done to us if either one of us breaks this. That is literally what is happening. It is why two people are being formed out of one. It is tearing one body. And that can't be done easily, quickly, or painlessly. So again, if you're single, choose wisely. If you're married, take a nap. Go to bed. And if you're divorced, well, read that book. It might help you. That's the second one. The third one is maybe the most important one, though, and it's the one that applies to everything. It's our covenant with God. And why this is different than our covenant that God has with us is because we're different than God. I think that's pretty obvious. But what I want to talk about with this one, and it's kind of wrap up our time, is this. In this room, what I know is many people, myself included, it is easy to treat God like a contract. And I know that because I've done that. You've probably done that. And what I mean is that we look at God and go, God, listen, here's the deal. I'm gonna go to church. I'm gonna be a really good person. I might give some money. I might serve on the weekends, maybe 5 o'clock on a Saturday night, hint, hint. I might do some other stuff, like, whatever. Let Jesus decide. But anyway, so, but I'm going to do all these things. And in return, God, I just expect you to help me, bless me, protect me. And we do that. I do that. We all do that. Like there's almost this kind of understood. In fact, I know that because when bad things happen, people look at me and go, I don't know why this is happening to me. You know what they're saying? God's broke the contract. I've been a good person. I should get a good life. Why do I have cancer? Why did they die? Why did she leave? Why didn't he come back? Why did I not get that job? Why? At the core of it, and I get it, I get the question, I have a lot of grace. I've walked through multiple seasons where I've had rough, hard conversations with God, where I have been frustrated and treated my relationship with an all-powerful, eternal, loving, good, holy God as if somehow we're negotiating a contract between us. I get it. And in this room, I know some of the stories, but I don't know all the stories. There's real pain, isn't there? There's some stories where you prayed about something and you had somebody else on 15 prayer groups and you believed and you trusted and you did all the things that you were supposed to do. They didn't make it. You're mad at God. He broke the contract. You were the good kid. And you did all the right things in high school. And you saved yourself maybe for marriage. And you did everything right. Only be let down in your marriage. Only be left or frustrated. You were the person who gave and gave and gave so financially. You trusted God with your money, and you trusted him and trusted him and trusted him. Only to lose everything. Be destitute. Frustrated. Looking at God going, no, God, I thought we had a contract. I was generous and you're generous, and here's the relationship and here's the contract, and you broke it. Get it. I've been in several different situations with God. Maybe your story is different. What I know is it's easy, even for the Christians, to treat God like a contract. But we're not made for contracts. We're made for covenants. And a covenant says, God, I'm with you, no matter what. So I love the story of Job. If you've never read the story of Job, it's in the middle of the book, middle of the Bible. If you don't know it's pronounced Job, you just look for the book called Job, okay? You'll find it. I had a young woman one time. I was 19 years old, and she walked back in the room, and Lisa and I, she was one of Lisa's friends, and she was going through a really, really hard time, and we didn't know where she was at. She comes out with a Bible, and we were blown away, and she goes, man, I've been reading this book, Job, because I need a job. This is so good. I was like, we're just going to let that go. Okay, so anyway. But if you don't know the story, it's about a man who had a great relationship with God. He did, again, most things right. He wasn't perfect, but it says he was righteous before God. He was a good guy. He loved God. He was all the things. And everything that could have went wrong for him. And actually, the whole book, it is so powerful. You should read it. It's actually about the conversations. It's not the story. The story really is the first chapter and the last chapter. Every chapter in between is just the relationship between him and his friends and him and God. And going back and forth and wrestling with God. And arguing and questioning and walking through that. And it's a beautiful book because, again, sometimes we grow up in church and we're told you shouldn't question God, you shouldn't argue with God, you shouldn't do that. You should absolutely argue with God. You should question, you should express your concerns, because here's the deal. He knows them. You're not fooling him. He's out there going, I think we're actually pretty good. I mean, she's been kind of snarky with me, but I think it's fine. Like, he's okay. He can handle your questions. You know what he wants? He wants you. And as long as you're holding back from him, he doesn't have you. You were made to be known and to know. And some of you need the freedom because you're walking through a painful situation and you've treated God like a contract, and I get it, and you're frustrated and you're mad. You have the freedom to express that to God, not to others. You have the freedom to express that, to be Job, to sit back and go, God, I don't understand. And allow God to speak into your life. But in the middle of this whole story, here's what Job says, and this is so powerful. In the middle of his darkest moment, I want you to see what he says. I made a covenant, not a contract. Job is speaking to God in the middle of his worst, darkest moment and going, no, listen, it was not a contract, God. I'm not walking away from you. I'm frustrated. I'm confused. I'm mad. I've got the worst friends in the world. That's a whole different sermon. But I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a woman. And then he says, for what is our lot from God above? Our heritage from the Almighty on high. And the rest of the chapter, while he starts with lust, he unpacks, he made a covenant with his relationships, with his pocketbook, with all the different areas over and over and over and over again. And I'm not sure if he's reminding himself or he's reminding God. I'm not sure the context. What I think is so beautiful is Job, in the worst moments of his life, is saying, God, I'm confused, I'm frustrated, but I'm still with you. I made a covenant with you. And some of you here today, you need to make a covenant with God. You have treated God like a contract, and as long as your life has been good, you've been good. And the moment that God didn't show up, you got mad and you got frustrated. It's like, I'm going to leave church and I'm not going to come back and I'm going to go over here, or I'm not going to pray anymore, or whatever those things are. Listen, I get it. I've been there. I've had seasons where I didn't really pray other than the obligatory, kind of help me, bless my food in front of other people. I've had seasons where I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. I get it. But a covenant says, God, I'm with you no matter what. In fact, said differently, God's covenant with us is about love. But our covenant with God is about trust. Because again, I started off and I said, listen, God made a covenant with us and you miss it. Again, you should go online, you should hear it. God's covenant with us is eternal, it's unconditional, sacramental, and it is incredibly relational. Why? Because God loves you, and his concern is that you would not understand the vastness of his love in the midst of your pain and problems. But our covenant with him is about trust, to say, God, in the middle of this, I don't understand it, I don't get it, but I trust you. I'm going to trust that you're working all things out for my good. I'm going to trust that you're asking me to give this up, and I'm going to give it up willingly, and somehow you're going to redeem this. I'm going to trust that while they were not healed, that somehow you have them and you have me. I'm going to trust you. So, to wrap it up, which of the relationships do you need to focus on and go deeper in? Others? Again, some of you just need to pray. You just need to ask God, hey, show me some people. Show me some people. And let God speak to you about who that is. And just so we're clear, don't call it up and be like, hey, man, I want you to know we're in a covenant right now. That's weird. Don't do that, okay? But you need to find some people, just a few, and just go deep. Just be very, very clear. For some, you are married, and today is a reminder, it's a covenant, not a contract, and go home, and if you got to, take a nap. Take 2 naps. Figure it out. But try again tomorrow. And for several, maybe today is the day that you just need to give your life to God completely. That you have, if you're being honest, your whole life you've treated God like a contract. Your whole life you just kind of had this agreement. God, I'm with you as long as you're with me. You bless me, I'll bless you. You go first. You give me money, I'll give you money. You give me time, I'll give you time. You give me people, I'll give you people. I'll figure it out. Like, I'm with you as long as you're with me. And today's the day that God's saying, no, I want you to surrender everything. I want you to trust me with your life, with everything, with your faith, with your family, with your finances, with your future, with your health and your fitness, with everything. Because you were made to be known and to know, to be in relationships that are covenants, not contracts, to walk in the security that no matter what happens, no matter who you are, what you do, you are unconditionally loved. Would you stand with me? Let me pray for you. I want to invite, this morning, I just want to invite everybody, would you bow your heads? And if you've never made that commitment to God, to surrender, to really trust him with your life, I want to invite you to pray this prayer, just with everybody praying at the same time. Just, if you need to repeat in your own mind, in your own head after me, just to put words to what you want to do, just say these words. God, I repent of my sins. I trust you with my past. I trust you with my future. Thank you, Jesus, for salvation. I love you. God, for the rest of us, God, help us walk in covenant with each other, with our spouses, with you. Let us not settle for contracts. Let us not settle for a false relationship, but to really be known and know you and those around us. We love you. We thank you so much. Amen.